Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're excited to be here today for one of our conversations with educators. And today, the title of our webinar is Ensuring Equity in the Classroom. And so we'll do some introductions and kind of go through the agenda, and then we'll just jump right in. So in just a moment, I'm going to introduce our guest speaker today. And then we're going to get into that guiding question, and that is, how do you ensure all students experience the same instructional path regardless of the teacher or building? And then we will open it up so that any of you all that are watching can ask questions, share ideas, things like that. We really want it to be, as I mentioned, a conversation. So without further ado, my name is Jenna DeFazio. I'm one of the customer success managers for Education Advanced. And I am joined today by Jennifer Hanni, who is the Director of School Improvement for Greenbush, which is an organization out of Kansas. And so she works with a lot of districts throughout Kansas, especially really getting their curriculum, tied to standards and things like that. I'll let her kind of talk about that, but equity is something that she works with those districts. So we are in very good company today. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer. I'll just have our question on the screen so that we're all kind of on the same page and we can get started.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jenna. I'm excited to be here. Curriculum right now is a huge topic with the districts that we serve in Kansas. For some reason, it seems like someone sprinkled math into the water. That seems to be a high priority. A couple of years ago, there was a big push for supporting struggling readers, the dyslexia initiative. So for the last several years, there's been a huge emphasis on structured literacy and literacy curriculum. And literally in the last couple of weeks, they've been knocking down the door with math. So curriculum is a big hot topic, as is diversity, equity, inclusion. So I think the guiding question for today is really timely and really important. So when it comes to curriculum, it's really very few people's favorite topics. Like there's only a few folks like Jenna and I and a few people who would say they love curriculum. There's a lot of teachers who love lesson planning that we work with, but we've seen many times if a district's or schools or classrooms curriculum is just a series of lesson plans, that's where equity might not necessarily be true. So when districts say, hey, we really want to work on our curriculum, I get excited, and then we emphasize why we're doing it. And it's so every kiddo, no matter what teacher they have, no matter what building they're in, we know they are getting the same content as someone in the next classroom or in a different building in that district. So that's easier said than done in some places. We work with districts that literally have one teacher per grade level, which makes it a little bit easier, except for what happens if that one teacher doesn't know any of the standards, right? And then we work with districts that have multiple high schools with 10 teachers teaching the same course. So it doesn't matter how big or small you are. This is a big deal. So even if you only have one teacher that's teaching that content, curriculum and having an aligned curriculum does matter. I loved working with Chris Trina, who created this product called BYOC that's called Embark. And one of the best things that I took away from what he would tell people is education or educating a student is like a 13-year plan. Which as a teacher, it's like, oh gosh, that's overwhelming, but that literally is what we're doing. So as schools and school leaders, we are taking kiddos from pre-K or kindergarten all the way through 12th grade and saying, by the end of 12th grade, we need kids to know, think, and be able to do this, right? So if we don't have a curriculum that maps it out from starting point to end point, that's where we can have some equity kind of problems. So mapping a curriculum, having grade level emphasize standards, having grade level scope and sequences where we say in third grade, we really need to spend about this much time on these concepts. And these are our must knows before they move on to fourth grade. Then your fourth grade teachers know these were the must knows, and they have a list of must knows for fifth grade. And it goes through this plan. That would be ideal. And that provides administrators who aren't going to be content experts in every single content, kind of a map of when they go into classrooms to work with teachers, to coach teachers, to be instructional leaders. They kind of have an idea of where they could be in kind of that scope and sequence. So a lot is emphasized on what is our plan and are we following our plan? Because without a plan, there's certainly not going to be equity depending on the classroom or the building.
I love that. Definitely having a plan in order to stay in, like what you said, for 13 years, right? So you can just imagine if you go off track for even a unit, like you're really throwing off that 13-year plan. And as you mentioned, it really gets into the equity, because if the student, those students that stayed on track and got through everything are going to be in a much different place than a student who didn't. So I really think like that really hits the nail on the head, and having the plan. And so within that plan, what do you think is what do you see districts doing to address the varying types of students you may see, so that they are getting that equity in terms of the plan?
Yep. So my brain works in analogies. Hopefully that's okay. Hopefully people can follow along. But as we're thinking of that plan, another visual that I like to do is kind of like a road trip. Now, a 13-year road trip, that might be a little bit too hard to conceptualize, but just think, let's call it a really long road trip, right? Where we know the starting point, we start them in kindergarten, and we know the end destination is we need to get here on the map. And then that curriculum map is kind of how are we going to get there? If we want to get there in the most efficient and effective way, we would have a plan. Now, we know some road trips where you can kind of meander and, we're going to take a little pit stop and we're going to take a little detour to go down here, which often happens in our classrooms, right? You might have a teacher who has a favorite topic that they're definitely going to do, right? Now, as long as they then go backtrack and get back on that same plan, equity is going to be there. But unfortunately, in many instances, that detour kind of cut off a main point, a main stop where they needed to pick up gas. And if they don't have gas, then that's kind of going to be a problem. So if you don't have a plan, number one, you're definitely not going to ensure that everyone's getting the same resources that they need moving forward. And if you do have a plan and no one's kind of checking in on it, making sure we're kind of aligning to it, you might not have what you need when you get to your end destination to really be successful. And if you're picturing that kind of road, there might be some bridges that are out. There might be detours that leave out a really important part. And that happens, sadly, more often than we probably would like. But if we can kind of use that emphasis to have teachers dig into the tough work that's beyond just lesson planning, we can maybe avoid some of those detours that distract from some of those main elements.
Yeah, I love that analogy. And actually, as you were talking, I was thinking about how within that analogy, students can kind of be looked at like the cars, right? Like some students are going to be like the Prius that doesn't need to stop for gas too often, and they can just keep going. So teachers need to be, the curriculum needs to have areas for that enrichment to get to those students and keep them
and a
going.
plan. Yeah. If you don't have a plan, you don't know where to send them next, because we don't know where that is on the map. Absolutely. You're right.
Exactly. And then if there's, like a big SUV that they're going to get there, they're definitely going to get there, but they're going to need some, more stops along the way. And so just really, I think that's something that I'm sure you work with the districts, just making sure that they have that remediation if they need it, differentiation and enrichment just built in to ensure that equity.
Absolutely. It starts with that plan, right? And then how kiddos get there or how you drive on that road, that can change, right? What music, what you're listening to as you're driving down the road can be different too. So a lot of times teachers don't want to lose their autonomy because everyone has their own style. You and I, if we were asked to create the exact same presentation, would use different colors, we'd use different verbiage, we'd use different activities, but we could arrive at the same goal. We're not saying we want what I call Stepford teachers who thou shalt teach exactly the same way, using the same exact methods, the same exact strategies. What we're asking, what we're talking about with a guaranteed viable curriculum is the content is the non-negotiable. The route is the non-negotiable. How you get there is absolutely where you can get the art of teaching. And make sure that teachers still feel like they have the autonomy, they can insert their personality in the how. It's the route that really can't change if we're ensuring equity.
Definitely. Yeah. And looking at it, because we all know, especially these days, we're having teachers that maybe you don't have as many of those like 15, 20, 30-year veterans anymore. They are first year. So having that solid plan in place is really going to ensure that, when your kid goes into a certain classroom, you can still have that confidence in the public education that they're going to come out with the same and be ready to go.
You just made me think of another conversation that we have a lot. So as we mentioned, often when districts come to us asking for support, it's not necessarily the teachers saying, we really need to spend a lot of time mapping our curriculum. That's not usually who's coming with the ask. It's usually our administrators who know it. Now, I don't think I've ever talked to a teacher who would disagree that we need a plan. Teachers totally agree a plan would be helpful. It's just a little bit harder when it gets to doing the work, mapping that route that we need to kind of provide some motivation. So you mentioned the difference between maybe a new teacher and a veteran teacher. One of the carrots that does not work in motivating teachers to do this work is, hey, when you leave, the teacher coming in is going to have a nice map planned out for them. Now, a lot of teachers are like, oh, how good for them. That didn't exist when I was here.
Let me do all that for them. Yeah.
Let's do all this work that's not going to benefit me. Now, if we really got them, they would recognize, okay, yes, it does benefit me. But that's when we get to play the student card and say, okay, amazing rock star veteran teacher. How many years did it take you, rock star teacher, to get to where you are now, where you feel really good about your plan and how your plan fits in to this whole route, the 13-year plan? How many years did it take you to do that? Varying answers. Never is it less than a couple. Usually it's around the 3 to 5 years. Like after I did this for about 5 years, I felt good with my plan and how my plan fit with others, which even that second part, how it fit with others, is still a little sketch. Okay. So 3 to 5 years to get my plan where I feel really good. So that's when I play the student card. I'm like, okay, so I think I'm hearing you say you'll be okay when you leave, that it's going to take, it's 5 years worth of students are going to go through this classroom and not get the good stuff that they're getting right now. So let's pretend they were a 9th grade teacher. So those 4th graders, it's the 5th graders, the current 6th graders, the current 7th graders, current 8th graders. Are we okay with them coming through these doors and not getting what these kiddos right now that are in your classroom are getting? And if we play kind of that card, that tends to be more motivating. But again, if we're talking about equity, that really is what's happening. If we don't have our really good teachers documenting their plan, we probably do have years worth of students who miss out on what kids before them were getting. So it's just having a documented curriculum can be really, really, is really, really crucial in equity.
Definitely. And that's, yeah, putting it in that perspective, from fourth to ninth to just
Mhm.
be missed. And how many teachers, you know, in their path has that happened with. And I think that brings to like a really good point of, in terms of equity, it's not always just necessarily the curriculum or the teacher, like even at the district level up, PD,
Mhm.
ensuring that there's PD there. So maybe it doesn't take, that 5 years, or, there's just things happening so that, when someone does leave or think, a standard does change, that you're able to adapt and kind of move with that, and still provide those experiences. And something else that I wanted to ask, just what you're seeing in the districts you go to, looking at different types of experiences. So maybe, in the community or field trip type things.
Mhm.
Are you seeing those be brought in, and at an equitable level, or are we in a post-COVID sort of situation where we're still not necessarily seeing those things?
Um, I mean, I work in Kansas, so we did not have the same exact experiences as I would say the coast when it comes to COVID, but we did have several districts that were completely remote for a majority of the year, if not the whole year. And then, so we're kind of coming out of it. In terms of activities and bringing in more of those community partnerships and those kinds of things. Um, but I do think mapping those things out, again, adding them to your route could be critical. I'm sure many people have been in instances where they take the field trip to the pumpkin patch like 3 years in the row, and the third year the kids are like, oh, we're doing that again, right? And
Mm.
a pumpkin patch field trip might not fall into the curriculum, although you hope it would, again, be a part of that map and not just some sort of random detour that keeps you from an important stop. Your question did also make me think of
Mhm.
this idea of maybe not even ventures out of the classroom, but what kind of resources are students being exposed to inside the classroom as well.
Sure.
And without a documented curriculum or a place where people can go and see what books are being written. I'm a former high school English teacher, and let me tell you, those folks, we are pretty darn territorial about which novels we want to teach. Right. And
Mhm.
if there isn't a place where we can document what novels we are teaching and hopefully why we're teaching them and what standards and content they're connected to, that can get kind of messy and ugly in places as well. So being able to document, make sure a kid doesn't read the same material 3 years, because again,
Sure.
equity wise, that kid compared to a different student who got exposure to 3 separate pieces, we're really talking equity. And then as if we're talking about the types of resources people are exposed to, are we doing a diversity, equity, inclusion kind of audit of our tools? Are we only exposing students to literature written by older white men? Is that something like, if we don't
Mhm.
have it down, how are we going to do an audit to know if we're really including people and resources and literature and examples that are from a diverse type environment? So I think I just keep saying the word documenting, but I think that's the whole point of a curriculum, right? If we're
Yeah.
just a series of lesson plans, maybe it's happening, but documented curriculum in a tool, in Google Docs, and Embark, like we talked about before, gives you and your teachers and your administrators and your equity teams a chance to really kind of see, what are we doing? And is there any changes that we need to make sure the resources that every student has access to meets all of those levels?
I completely agree. I think because we cannot ensure what the day to I don't know how to say this, the day-to-day experience, we don't know what's going to happen in those day-to-day, but when that plan is there, we know that no matter who's in that classroom, these are the ideas that are going to be, you know, shared. This is the instructional path. So it doesn't matter which student you are, which room you're in. that is how you get the equity. I think, this question isn't going to be answered, one way, but I think whichever way you go to answer it, it's always going to be having that plan and knowing where you're going, because as you mentioned, you can hope, but that's not going to
Hope is
help
not a
you, right?
strategy. Hope is
Exactly.
not a strategy. Thanks, Rachel Hollis. I stole that from her, but I hear it and I totally agree. I do want to maybe call out one more group. I don't know who's joining us or who will be listening to this. But if the question is, how do you ensure all students? I think we've spent a lot of good time talking about how our teachers can help with this. And they're the boots on the ground. They're the ones really making sure they stay on that route, plan a route and stay on the route. But something that we really emphasize with our districts that we support is how important the building leadership and district leadership is in supporting those teachers and providing some accountability checkpoints when it comes to staying on those paths. We've seen curriculum movements fail several times because when they ask us to come in and support their teachers writing the curriculum, the principals aren't involved. And then when we leave and the curriculum's all done, if the principals aren't looking at that before they're going into classrooms, then really there isn't any sort of check to make sure that we're staying on the route. This isn't to say because we're trying to catch teachers doing wrong. That's not what I'm saying. In many, many instances, what's happening is the needs in the classrooms aren't aligning with the current path. The path says we need to go this fast, and the kids in the classroom are saying, we need more pit stops. We got to go to the bathroom. And it's not fair to make the teacher figure out how you're going to catch up, right? Like the teacher can't add more days to the end of the school year. He or she really needs the instructional leader of the building to help thought partner with her. Hey, what can we do to support this classroom of students who has more needs, or that we're kind of already done with this part. We went real fast. They didn't need to go to the bathroom. So where do I go next? Instead of just figuring it out on their own, having leaders be there to support and see how they can do that. So teachers are critical, obviously, in this process of writing the plan and enacting the plan. But in order to ensure all students experience the same instructional path, that's where your leadership really plays a critical role. And I think that often is forgotten or more overlooked when districts do kind of this curriculum work.
I think going back to your analogy, the administrators, the leadership is who's ensuring that path, that we're taking the right path, right? You're writing the path, but we need someone to kind of check in. Yes.
It's Siri on the phone. I'm really sorry if you guys don't like analogies, but this one is luckily working out. Yes,
I'm loving
Siri,
it.
when you take the detour, she's like, hey, reroute or take a U-turn. That's where the administrator, and if that's not there, if you didn't have Siri telling you, hey, you're off the track,
you're going right into the accident traffic.
Yes. Yes.
Exactly. Well, that's wonderful. Like, I think we really kind of talked a lot about that. With taking a look at the time, I want to give our participants a chance to, open it up to any questions. So just please feel free to use that chat feature to go ahead and ask any questions. We are both educators, so we'll give some wait time for that to happen. And while we do the wait time, I will just say that, it's not supposed to be like a big plug or anything, but we do just want to have some of the resources that we do have available at Education Advance to kind of, we can't take away what the work is, but we do try to make, solve problems. So, if you have any questions about any of the products that we have or how they could help your districts, we're always happy to talk about that. And if we do want to talk about that, there's some contact information. So I'll just have that up so that you have that, and we'll give a few minutes, like I said, for any questions. And I do just want to say thank you to Jennifer, because it was a really great conversation. I think we got into, this could definitely help some districts maybe looking at equity within their schools, and even, taking a look at curriculum, which is so hard to look at and so hard to, it's not an easy task, even when you have the tools,
Yep.
and the route and the plan, like it's still difficult. So it's always something that I like to, I'm, like you said, I'm one of the people that does like curriculum, but
No, there's not very many of us.
it's a challenge.
Yeah. And I can put in a plug. This work can be done in Google Docs. It can be done. Curriculum mapping isn't about the tool, just like we know it's people, not products.
Mhm.
That said, I was just working with the district who is doing all of their mapping on Google Docs. I don't remember if it's a Google Doc or Google Sheet, irrelevant. They will have to hand calculate any sort of standards coverage, any of that kind of stuff, which can be done totally. In districts that use Embark, it's usually like click, click, there's all your reporting. So instead of spending all your time creating the report and never having time to actually do anything with it, with Embark, many of our districts click a couple buttons after the hard work of curriculum entry has been completed. They can click a couple of buttons and boom, there's lots of the reports. So while it can't do the hard work for you, there is advantages to using some of the tools to really make that hard work matter in the long run.
Definitely some efficient pieces where the machine can do it. The machine can't do everything though. It is your people for sure.
Yep.
And following those curriculum and everything, the standards. Well, it doesn't look like any questions are coming in.
Yep.
So just to be conscious of everybody's time, which I know is at a premium, I'm just going to say thank you so much, Jennifer. This was an awesome conversation. I really appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. My pleasure. It was fun.
All right. Well, everybody take care. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.